In this video, I will quickly go over some loose ends or questions or open questions which Evans's paper um, gives rise to. And in thinking about these questions, we will anticipate some of the further material that we look at. So in particular, the next lecture on another paper of John Campbell's will be one way of refining some of the general ideas in Evans's paper that we have just read. And furthermore, next week, many of the ideas will be highly related to the general framework of thinking about sense, which Evans's paper, Understanding Demonstrative, opened up. So the first loose end, it has to do with demonstratives. So in his paper, Evans does not say much about demonstratives, for instance, the word that man. Instead, Evans focuses on indexicals like the word today, or I. And this is, I'm sure, partly because these are the ones that Perry is focused on. So that means that we should wonder is how can we give a neo-Frege treatment of demonstratives? And in fact, we'll see that in the next lecture. The next question is, what is sense? So Evans's proposal of abilities to keep track of things makes some progress towards answering the question of what is sense. However, we can still wonder about the exact nature of those abilities to keep track of things. So again, Evans appeals to the idea that humans are able to keep track of objects, locations, times, and his notion of sense appeals to those abilities. But Evans does not say much more about what exactly those abilities consist of. So in that sense, Evans's proposal is still schematic or programmatic, and we can still wonder about how we can fill in more detail the ability we have to keep track of, say, objects. And in the case of keeping track of objects, for demonstratives, again, in the next lecture, we'll look at a very specific proposal for how that works. Now, the final thing, which we'll be looking at next week, is the dynamics of communication. So, what matters for Evans's general framework is that singular terms have a sense just in case there is some particular way of thinking of a referent that is required in order to understand a singular term. So one thing we can ask is, are there really clear cases in which understanding a singular term requires thinking of the referent in a particular way? And if we can show that, then it seems that there really is an important notion of sense. So we'll look at some cases of that next week. And furthermore, Evans's discussion of dynamic senses, it focuses on what we can call the diachronic intrapersonal case. So these are fancy words, and they just mean that what Evans focuses on with dynamic senses is the case of a single individual thinking about an object over time. So diachronic means over time. But it's within a single individual. Okay, so we think about a single individual keeping track of a day, for instance. And the fact that it's diachronic, that it's keeping track of something over time, is what makes it dynamic. But there's another way of thinking about how senses are dynamic, where we don't think about the passage of time, but we think about two different people, or we think about the interpersonal case. So we consider two people from their own perspectives talking about some object, and we can think about the dynamic nature of sense, and we can think about whether that can capture not just a single individual over time, but two different individuals talking at the same time. So these kind of open questions for making sense of Neo-Phrygian, the Neo-Phrygian view of meaning, will guide us over the next week and a half.